Thank you for plugging into this Family Life News podcast, streaming issues-driven, family-focused news.
Tracy Lynn, and this is our summer-long Staycation Destination series. Every Friday during the Noon Report, we'll spotlight a staycation destination that's not far from home and won't break the bank. This week, we're taking you to the Onondaga Historical Museum in Syracuse, New York.
My name is Robert Searing. I'm the Curator of History at the Onondaga Historical Association in downtown Syracuse.
So, Bob, you have called Central New York the Great Central Depot of the Underground Railroad. Would you, first of all, briefly explain what the Underground Railroad was, especially for our younger listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. The Underground Railroad was really underground in the sense that it was a secret system that moved slaves that had run away from bondage in the South through northern locales, ultimately getting them to freedom in Canada. It operated on a sort of, you had to know someone in each community, depending on how fervent the support for abolition was, or the Underground Railroad, had a series of stations and station masters. So essentially, the idea that it was a railroad really comes after the fact. Some folks actually are under the impression that there was a railroad. There was not. It was just a way to be...
Chugga chugga.
Yeah, exactly, that you would jump on the train. But no, it was a series of stations and station masters. And it's a really romantic topic in the sense that there's a lot of things that aren't known. There's a lot of mythology around it, but we do know that it was a very real network of like-minded abolitionists and people that were fighting the injustice of slavery and trying to get people out of bondage and again, to their freedom in Canada.
And Syracuse in that area played a big part.
It was a huge part. Central New York, because of the canal, and Syracuse is known as the Central City. We're almost geographically in the middle of New York State. Because Syracuse was at the center, really, of a transportation network that included the railroads, that included the Erie Canal, the Oswego Canal. It was a short ride up the canal to Lake Ontario, and from there, a ride on to Canada. So here in Syracuse, a particularly important figure, the Reverend Jermaine Wesley Logan, who himself was an escaped slave, was known during his day by contemporaries, including his very good friend Frederick Douglass, as the Underground Railroad King. It's believed that Reverend Logan and his wife Caroline helped shepherd upwards of 1,500 runaway slaves to freedom in Canada. And Reverend Logan was a major figure in Syracuse and one that was rather brazen in his advertisements in the newspaper. It was a place where people knew to come, and they looked for Reverend Logan, and Reverend Logan would very often get them up into Canada.
Wow, this is a fascinating part of history. How did songs like Follow the Drinking Gourd play a role in a slave's journey to freedom in the 1800s, Bob?
Well, that's a great song, and there's a great cover of it, obviously, by Richie Havens. But the Drinking Gourd song is one that falls into that mythology of the Underground Railroad. I mean, we know that it certainly was sung, and there are breakdowns as to what the lyrics meant, essentially coded lyrics. But the Drinking Gourd was a reference to the Big Dipper. And those of us that are interested in astronomy are aware that the Big Dipper contains Polaris, the North Star, and if you are able to trace through the Big Dipper and you can find the North Star, you can walk directionally north. So that was a way by which, again, that sort of coded language of runaways to follow the drinking gourd, the old man come to carry you to freedom. That language certainly was something that would have been passed along, particularly in the border states. It was very difficult for slaves to get out of the deep cotton South, but slaves on the border in Maryland, Delaware, and Kentucky, it was much easier for them to get out and follow the drinking gourd on their way here to the north.
Are many of the buildings that were used as stopovers or stations, as you call them, en route to the north still standing in central New York and available to be seen today?
Well, there are a few. Unfortunately, not as many as we would like. Here in Syracuse, one of the great stops that you can make is called the Mission Restaurant, and it's actually an old Wesleyan Methodist church that was built in the early 1840s, right here in downtown. It's actually right down the street from our museum. It was absolutely a stop on the Underground Railroad. We know that it had sort of a false basement, so that is still standing. That is a really powerful reminder of the Underground Railroad's presence here in central New York. Unfortunately, the home of Jermaine Logan was torn down in the middle of the 20th century, so we've lost that, as we have a lot of other homes. The other issue, obviously, with that is, as things were very secretive, it's difficult to know exactly whose house was where. But Peterborough, Garrett Smith's estate, just outside of Utica, is another spot that I would highly recommend if you're interested in this. Peterborough was really a refuge for a lot of of slaves on their way to freedom in the North as well. So, yeah, there are a lot of hot spots in the Finger Lakes. I know is also sort of filled, depending on the county, with a couple different places that you can visit. But, yeah, here in Central New York, there are still a few places where you can go see where those slaves were held while they were trying to get to freedom in Canada.
Thank you, Bob. Freedom Bound is actually among the permanent exhibits at the Onondaga Historical Museum in downtown Syracuse. Will you tell us something unique that we could see among that collection in the Salt City?
Yeah, absolutely. We have two things that I think are really amazing to see. So here in Syracuse in October of 1851 was one of the great events in the lead up to the abolition of slavery known as the Jerry Rescue, when a group of Syracuse citizens, white, black, came together to break William Jerry out of bondage. He had been arrested by a slave catcher to be taken back under the auspices of the Fugitive Slave Act. Reverend Samuel May, Reverend Samuel Logan, and the Vigilance Committee that was here in the city literally went to the jail and broke him out and got him to freedom, and he ultimately made it all the way to Kingston. We actually here in the museum have the shackles that were on Jerry as he awaited trial that morning. So they are on display, an incredibly powerful reminder of the struggles and slavery itself and the fear that many black Americans had to live with in the North while slave catchers were running around trying to get them. One of the other really amazing things we have, I had mentioned the Wesleyan Church in downtown Syracuse. In one of the basements in the church, there were found several faces sort of carved into the earthen walls down there in the basement. And we speculate, based on some archaeological evidence, that they were there at least in the 1870s. So some speculate that they may have been, in fact, been made by slaves awaiting transportation out of the city. And we have several of those on display in our Underground Railroad exhibit, Freedom Bound. So two really incredible pieces that you can see here at our museum in downtown Syracuse.
Bob, what is the cost for visitors to explore the Onondaga Historical Museum?
We are actually free and open to the public. We do, if you're able, recommend a donation if possible, but there is no admission fee. We've been free and open to the public since the museum has been around since the 1980s, and we're very proud of that. We also have a phenomenal gift shop here, a gift gallery with some wonderfully unique, really one-of-a-kind pieces, up to shirts. We have an amazing bookstore here. We've got some jewelry made out of typewriters. Syracuse is once a typewriter city. Syracuse China, things that people would be familiar with, but there is no price of admission, so it really is something that you can do rather cheaply.
Great. And so what are the hours and times people can come and explore?
The museum is open Wednesday through Sunday from 10 o'clock to 4 o'clock. We're closed on Monday and Tuesday. Those are our regular hours.
Great, Bob. And how else might visitors be surprised as they roam the displays at OHM?
Well, we've just got a really wide variety that harkens back to Syracuse's industrial past. We've got a really wonderful Native American section that highlights some of the history of the Haudenosaunee and the Onondaga Nation, which, of course, call this part of the state home. One of my favorite pieces, we actually have Libba Cotton, the famous blues songwriter and guitar player. We have her Martin and her Grammy Award on display. Right now on the second floor, we have an amazing clothing exhibit out, some beautiful Victorian gowns going all the way back to the 1840s. And we have an American arts and crafts exhibit up with lots of pieces made by Gustav Stickley himself on display so people can come see, again, another way in which central New York touched the entire world.
Bob, where can we learn more? And then what are the COVID restrictions? Do we need to wear a mask?
Yes, we are going to be having a mask. We're going to be limiting the museum to 15 people per floor. But yeah, if you have a mask, you'll be able to walk around. We've taken away all of our interactive touch screens and things like that, but everything else will be accessible. The other way you can get involved, obviously, we have a website, cnyhistory.org. We are also on Facebook at the Onondaga Historical Association. We have an incredible amount of videos and content and photographs, and we write out essays every day. So I really would recommend you to follow us on Facebook and check us out on cnyhistory.org. We're looking forward to people coming down to the museum.
We hope you've enjoyed coming along on our staycation destination. You can hear all the podcasts online. Join us next week as we visit Knoebels Amusement Resort in Elysburg, Pennsylvania.